Sometimes the cruelest betrayal comes wrapped in a wedding invitation. What I discovered about my own family would make me question everything I thought I knew about love, loyalty, and the price of belonging. "I never meant to invite you." "We don't want you here." That's what my only brother said. My only brother's wedding. The once-in-a-lifetime family event. And I learned I was excluded. My name is Emily Carter, and, at 31, I had mastered the art of being invisible, not by choice, but by design, their design. I was the middle child who learned early that silence meant survival, that being useful might earn me scraps of attention. What my family didn't know was that their ghost daughter had quietly built a fortune they couldn't imagine. But that revelation was still to come. For some reason, I was often the only one left out of family gatherings. I always gave them the benefit of the doubt. They probably just forgot, I'd tell myself. It's nothing personal. I held on to that thought for far too long. Maybe part of me believed that if I just stayed useful and kind, they'd eventually notice me again, but the signs had been there for years. Christmas mornings when I'd arrived to find they'd already opened gifts without me. "We thought you weren't coming," Mom would say with that practiced smile. Birthday parties where I'd learn about them through social media posts. Graduations, promotions, anniversaries. I was always the afterthought. The +1 they forgot to plus. Last year, they skipped my birthday dinner entirely. All I got was a short text from my mother. "Happy birthday, Emily." No emoji. No warmth. Only Aunt Margaret was on my side. She'd call sometimes and ask the one thing no one else did. "Don't you feel lonely?" She was the only one who seemed proud when I left home and built my own career. The rest of the family dismissed my job in digital marketing as just messing with computers. They had no idea I had been financially successful. I never bragged, and they never asked. So when an invitation to James's wedding arrived last month, I couldn't believe it. What I didn't tell anyone was that this invitation felt like vindication. For months, I'd been secretly planning to surprise them at the wedding, not just with my presence, but with an announcement. I was finally ready to reveal my success, to show them the daughter they'd overlooked had become someone remarkable. I had prepared a speech, practiced it in the mirror, imagined their faces when they realized their invisible daughter was actually thriving. Printed on thick cardstock in silver lettering, it read, "You are cordially invited to the wedding of James Carter and Sophie Lane." The date was July 22nd, set in an upscale vineyard in the countryside, with a reception to follow at a riverside estate. My hands trembled with excitement. I thought this was a sign. I'd spent weeks picking out a breathtaking dress and the perfect gift. I booked a hair appointment, got my nails done. For years, I'd only wanted one thing: to be acknowledged, to be useful, to be needed. And finally, I thought that moment had come. I believed this invitation would thaw the ice between me and my family, that I would finally be welcomed, that I would finally be seen. I had no idea how wrong I was, but there were red flags I ignored. When I called to confirm my attendance, James's phone went straight to voicemail. When I asked Mom about wedding details, she was unusually vague. "Oh, you know how weddings are," she'd say, changing the subject. Even Sophie, who I'd tried to build a relationship with, had stopped responding to my texts weeks earlier. The day before the wedding, I drove to Aunt Margaret's house, my beacon. I wanted to show her the surprise gift I planned to give my brother at the wedding. When I arrived, she seemed slightly startled but welcomed me warmly as always. "I can't wait for tomorrow," I said, hugging her with excitement. But there was a trace of sadness in her eyes, a hint of guilt. "How have you been, Emily? Would you like some coffee?" she asked, and led me to the living room, and I could hear the tension in her voice. On the coffee table was an unfamiliar photo album. While she was in the kitchen, preparing coffee, I opened it without thinking. Inside were familiar faces. My entire family smiling in a beautiful vineyard. "Aunt Margaret, what's this from?" I asked as she came back with a coffee tray. I noticed her hands were trembling slightly. "Oh, James's wedding last weekend," she faltered. "Emily, I wanted to tell you I tried to call, but I couldn't find the courage." My heart stopped. The wedding? She sat beside me and took my hand. You thought it was tomorrow, didn't you? I couldn't believe what they did either, giving you the wrong date on purpose, I protested. I told James and your parents this was cruel. My voice trembled. But I got the invitation. I've been preparing. Anger flared in Margaret's eyes. They excluded you intentionally. I almost didn't go because of it, but in the end I went, and thinking of you I feel so deeply sorry. I picked up the album again and flipped through the pages. Everyone was there. A gorgeous vineyard ceremony, fairy lights, wine glasses. Everyone dressed to the nines, even distant relatives I hadn't seen in years were there. There were vows, speeches, dancing, and group photos. This wasn't some small private event. This was a real wedding. My only brother's wedding. A once-in-a-lifetime family event. As I stared at those photos, I noticed something else that cut deep. In the family group photo, someone had physically moved to fill the space where I would have stood. They hadn't just excluded me, they had erased me so completely that there wasn't even a gap to mark my absence. I counted the heads, 47 people. Cousins I barely knew, family friends, even James's college roommate I'd met once, but not me. Never me. My face burned and my mouth went dry like desert sand. I need to confirm this, I said, standing up. Margaret held my hand tightly. Emily, wait. Before you confront them, just know you're strong. You always have been. But this was cruel. You shouldn't go alone. I'll come with you. I took a deep breath. Thank you, Aunt Margaret, but this is something I have to do myself. She nodded. All right, but whatever happens, I'm always on your side. I always have been. I always will be. Empowered by her words, I got in my car and drove toward my parents' cabin. But what Margaret hadn't told me was the phone call she'd received from my mother the night before. Margaret, if Emily asks about the wedding, please don't make this harder than it needs to be. We're trying to protect the family from unnecessary drama. That conversation had been eating at Margaret all week, and now she was watching me drive straight into the storm she'd tried to shield me from. My mind was spinning and my heart was in chaos. Without Aunt Margaret's steady support, I don't think I could have been this strong. She was the only one who ever acknowledged how isolated I'd been in the family, the only one who sometimes raised her voice against it. When I arrived at the cabin, I saw not only my parents' car, but also a familiar blue SUV in the driveway. It was James's car. My hands trembled as I opened the door. Laughter drifted from the living room. There they were. My parents, my brother James, and Sophie, clearly the bride, though now dressed casually instead of in white. They were laughing over a set of photos, wedding photos. But it was what I overheard before they noticed me that shattered something inside my chest. God, can you imagine if Emily had actually shown up? James was saying, and they all burst into laughter. Remember her face at Christmas when she realized we'd started without her? Sophie added. She looked like a lost puppy. More laughter. They were reminiscing about my pain like it was their private entertainment. The moment I walked in, the conversation stopped. Everyone turned to look at me. For a moment, the room froze in silence. Emily? My mother looked startled. What are you doing here? I went to Aunt Margaret's, I said, though my voice didn't sound like mine. She told me the wedding was last weekend. I didn't miss the glance exchanged between James and Sophie. Sophie's lips pressed into a thin line. Oh yes, my mother said, her eyes dodging mine. It was a beautiful little ceremony. Little? I thought of the album. There were over 60 people there. And I got an invitation for a ceremony happening tomorrow. That's right, James suddenly said, sounding tired. Because we never intended to invite you. The air changed. No one stopped him. We didn't want you ruining our wedding, he said, looking right at me. You're always quiet, always in the background, but somehow things go wrong around you. People don't know how to act when you're there. I wanted one perfect day in my life, and that meant without you. Things go wrong around me? I repeated, my voice hollow. Like what, James? Like Mom's birthday 3 years ago when you had that panic attack, he said cruelly, like Dad's retirement party when you couldn't stop crying because nobody wanted to sit with you. You make everything about your problems. Each word felt like a physical blow. These weren't accidents or misunderstandings. They were keeping a catalog of my lowest moments, turning my vulnerabilities into evidence against me. A sharp pain pierced my chest. Every strange look, every feeling of exclusion I brushed aside, they all crystallized. In that moment, "You felt this way for a long time?" I asked. "All of us have," my mother added quietly. But her words were clear. "To be honest, Emily, you've always been extra, like a ghost that leaves no trace but still needs looking after at family events." Emily, they don't mean it like that," my father cut in, rushing. "We just wanted to keep the wedding small." My mother spoke over him, calm and cold. "You're disrupting the peace we've spent years building in this family." "Peace?" I stared at her in disbelief. "By ignoring me? By cutting me out?" James sighed. "Let's end this conversation. We tried to avoid this. This is exactly why we didn't invite her," he said, looking at my parents as if I wasn't even there. "Take the hint," he said, cold and clear. "We don't want you." Time seemed to stop. No one moved. "I see," I finally said. I turned on my heel and walked out of the house. Before getting into the car, I called Aunt Margaret. "Thank you, Auntie, for always being in my corner." "Always, Emily," she replied softly. "You are my family, and family isn't about blood. It's built on love and respect." Her words echoed in me. They gave me the strength to decide what to do next. But as I drove away, I made a decision that would change everything. I wasn't going to disappear into my pain this time. They wanted me gone? Fine. But they were about to learn exactly what they were losing. What they didn't know was that their useless daughter had been quietly supporting their lifestyle for years. The anonymous checks that covered their property taxes? That was me. The mysterious benefactor who paid for Dad's heart surgery when insurance fell short? Me. The lucky windfall that fixed their roof last spring? All me. On the drive home, I couldn't stop hearing James's words. Take the hint. I replayed them over and over, like I was some oblivious intruder who refused to get the message despite all the signs that had been there for years. Like believing I still had a place in their lives was some sort of burden. Hot tears ran down my face as I gripped the steering wheel. It wasn't missing the wedding that broke me. It was the crushing clarity, the undeniable confirmation that I wasn't part of them anymore. But here's what matters most. I'm not someone who seeks revenge. I don't cling to small grievances. I don't want to hurt anyone. What I wanted, what I needed, was to finally let go. No more hope. No more showing up with a smile. No more offering kindness like a bargaining chip, hoping for a seat at their table. That night, I started planning. Not revenge, something more lasting. Something they would never expect because they never cared to know the real me. The first thing I did was pull up my financial records. Over the past 5 years, I had quietly funneled over $200,000 0 cents into their lives. Anonymous donations, emergency funds, strategic investments that benefited them without their knowledge. I had been their secret guardian angel, and they had treated me like their family curse. That ended tonight. The first step was financial. The truth is, I have done well these past few years. I worked in digital marketing, not a billionaire, but very comfortable, especially since branching into property management. I'd made some excellent investments. No one ever asked about my life. So they didn't know I now owned 4 rental properties. They didn't know I had been quietly covering my parents' expenses through anonymous grants from my LLC. The roof repairs, the plumbing issues, even the property taxes. I never needed recognition. I just wanted to support them because they were my parents. The next day I contacted Lisa Chen, my attorney. She's the sharp woman who handles my real estate investments. Once I explained the situation, she sprang into action. "They've been emotionally abusing you for years," she said, jotting notes down. "And now, despite being financially dependent on you, this is how they treat you." "That's right," I said. "I don't think they even realize how much I've supported their lives, but honestly, I don't want to keep doing it. I need to protect myself. Lisa nodded. We can file for a restraining order. If there's evidence of emotional abuse and harassment, the court will likely grant it. Over the next few days, I gathered everything. Records of ignored invitations, screenshots from group chats, the wedding photos, and the most damning piece, the invitation to a wedding that had already happened a week before. But I also gathered something else. Financial records showing every anonymous payment I'd made to support them, bank transfers, bill payments, property investments that kept their credit afloat. When the judge saw the extent of my financial support, coupled with their emotional abuse, her expression shifted from professional neutrality to genuine shock. "Ms. Carter," she said, "this is one of the most clear-cut cases of familial exploitation I've ever seen." A month later, the court approved a temporary restraining order. With Lisa's help, I served legal documents to every family member. It prohibited them from coming near me physically and restricted all online contact. And one more thing. I signed papers formally ending my financial assistance for their home repairs. I froze the account. The first call came from my mother. "Emily, what is this?" she cried. "Be your family." "Not anymore," I answered quietly. "You've made it clear for years that I wasn't part of this family. Now, I'm just formalizing it." "This is ridiculous," she said. "We were just what?" I asked. "Pretending I didn't exist? Erasing me? That's how you treat family?" After a pause, she whispered, "Is this about money? You're mad because we needed your help. I didn't even know you were paying for the repairs until I saw the notice." Those words chilled me. That's exactly the problem. You never understood. And I hung up. Then came the flood of angry messages from James, threatening to take me to court, calling me crazy, blaming me for our parents' financial struggles. But the most surprising response came from my father. He reached out to my lawyer and sent me a formal letter, the only method allowed under the restrictions. "Emily," he wrote, "I watched in silence as you were pushed out of the family. My cowardice led us here. If legal action is what it takes, maybe it's what we deserve. I just want you to know I'm sorry. If I had been a better father, this might not have happened." Reading his letter, I felt a flicker of pity, but the pain was still fresh. The wounds were still deep. The restraining order remained in place. Lisa handled their continued questions about finances. Eventually, they understood this wasn't a bluff. I was no longer part of their lives, and I was ready to face the consequences of their careless words and actions. But this was only the beginning. The real shock came when I discovered they had been actively sabotaging my relationships. Through old emails I found while organizing my documents, I learned that my mother had contacted my ex-fiancé 3 years ago, telling him I was unstable and had dependency issues. She had reached out to potential employers, former friends, even my college roommate, spreading subtle but damaging whispers about my mental health. They hadn't just excluded me. They had been systematically destroying my connections to ensure I would always need them, always come crawling back. A few days after the restraining order was issued, I was finally ready to take the hardest step. That day, Lisa called me. "Emily, about your parents' cabin. It's ready legally. It's yours. You have the right to evict them. What would you like to do?" "Send the eviction notice," I said without hesitation. That cabin was the last thread connecting me to them. It wasn't mine originally. It had belonged to my grandparents. Then it got passed to my mother. Years ago, when my parents fell behind on payments, I quietly purchased my mother's share. Legally, I owned it all, but no one in the family ever updated their assumptions. They treated it like a shared family property. Everyone used it for weekends, holidays, even whole summers. Eventually, after retirement, my parents decided to live there full-time, and I allowed it, but then I was done. I was ready to take it back. The following Monday, I drove to the cabin with David Kim, another attorney. The sheriff came with us just in case. When we arrived, my father greeted us at the door. He looked older. His hair was nearly white. "Emily," he said weakly, "won't you come in?" "No," I replied. "David, please explain." David cleared his throat and handed my father a formal envelope. "Mr. Carter, this is an official notice of eviction from this property. You have 45 days to vacate and return the key." My father stared at the paper, his hands shaking. "But this is our home." "No," I said, my voice calm, though my heart pounded. "This is my property. I allowed you to use it before, but that permission has been revoked." My mother appeared behind the door. "What's going on? They're telling us to leave, Linda," my father said. His voice trembled. My mother looked at me, her eyes filled with betrayal. "You're kicking us out of our home, our retirement home." "You've always known this was legally mine," I replied. "You've continued to take advantage of my kindness." "We have nowhere to go," she said. "You can live with James," I answered. "He made it very clear a few months ago that I wasn't family." My father lowered his head. He was wrong. We all were. "It's too late," I said. "In 45 days, if you're not prepared to move out, your remaining belongings will be removed and the locks changed." "Were your parents? Why are you doing this?" Her voice was shaky with confusion. "Because, as you said, I got the hint." As I turned to leave, my father grabbed my arm. "We're truly sorry, Emily," he said, eyes welling with tears. "Can't you give us one more chance?" I gently pulled my arm away. "You had years. You had countless chances. And I'll say it again, it's too late." That day, as I left the cabin, I felt something heavy lift from my shoulders. I no longer needed their approval. I no longer needed them to define my worth. 45 days later, they left quietly. The cabin was sold. I began a new chapter. About 4 months after evicting my parents, it happened. It was an October day, touched with the first hint of autumn. I got a call from reception at my office. "Emily, there's someone here to see you. They said their name is Carter." My chest tightened. The restraining order was still in place, but as long as they remained in the lobby of the office building, they weren't technically violating it. "I'll be down in 5 minutes." When I got to the lobby, I saw them. My parents looked older, especially my father. His shoulders were hunched. New deep lines had carved into my mother's face. They wore cheap clothes. I noticed a hole in one of my father's shoes. "Emily," my mother said, her voice soft and trembling. She took a step forward, but I instinctively stepped back. "What are you doing here?" I asked, keeping my voice as steady as I could. "The restraining order is still valid." "We know," my father said, "but we needed to talk." "Go through my lawyer," I said. "We can't afford one," he replied. His voice was small, wounded. "Emily, we've lost everything." I looked more closely. My mother's wedding ring was gone. The heirloom watch my father had inherited from his father was missing. Had they pawned them? After we left the cabin, we rented an apartment. My father continued. "But the rent was too high. Then the car broke down. We couldn't afford the repairs. My savings ran out," he trailed off. "We tried staying with James," my mother said. "But things with him and Sophie, they're not doing well. They have problems of their own." "We're living in a motel now," my father added. "We can afford maybe 1 more week. After that, we don't know." Tears welled in my mother's eyes. "Emily, I know you'll help. You've always been a good girl, so caring. You've always looked out for us. Always forgotten, though," I said quietly. "Can't we just put the past behind us?" my mother pleaded. "We're your parents." I looked out the large lobby window. The autumn sunlight painted the fallen leaves on the street gold. It would be so easy to go back to help them, to hand over the money, to fix their problems again like I used to. For a moment, I felt the temptation. Their suffering tugged at my heart. But then I remembered Margaret's words. "Emily, take care of yourself. If they won't treat you like family, you have no obligation to treat them like family either." "I can't help you," I said. Simple words, but they were incredibly hard to say. "But," my father began. "I'm not your bank," I cut him off. "I'm not your parent, and just like James said, I'm not your family. So, I don't owe you family duties." My mother started to sob. "We were wrong. I admit it. Please, just give us another chance." "There are no more chances," I said. "I'm done." I turned away from them and walked toward the elevator. My heart ached, but at the same time, I felt a strange sense of relief. At least let us stay one night, my father called out from behind me. I didn't answer. I pressed the elevator button. Before the doors closed, I could hear my mother crying. Tears welled in my eyes, too, not from sadness, but from the relief of finally choosing to respect myself. That night, I called Aunt Margaret. My parents came to my office, I explained. They needed money, but I said no. That must have been a hard decision, she said. It was, I admitted. But I think it was the right one. It's time I start living my own life. You're absolutely right, Emily, Margaret said. Your life belongs to you. But what I didn't tell Margaret was what happened after my parents left. I had followed them discreetly, watching as they walked to their beat-up car in the parking garage. My mother was sobbing, leaning against my father, and for a moment, I almost ran after them. Almost. But then I saw something that steeled my resolve. In the car, my father was on the phone with someone, and I could hear fragments through their open window. She's being stubborn. We need to try a different approach. Maybe if we get James too. They weren't reflecting on their behavior. They were strategizing their next manipulation. A month later, I received a message from Sophie. I've decided to leave James. I've started divorce proceedings, she wrote. After seeing how he treated you and watching how he handled things when your parents were in trouble, I finally saw who he really was. That must be so hard, I replied, surprised by the wave of sympathy I felt for her. He's changed completely. Ever since I brought up divorce, he's been spiraling. He stopped going to work. He's been drinking too much. He got fired last week. I looked out the window, torn inside. Emily, let me say this. We were wrong about the wedding, about cutting you out. I followed James, but it was a mistake. After reading her message, I sat for a long time. I didn't feel joy or satisfaction at what my brother was going through. Instead, there was a strange emptiness. He was now facing the consequences of his choices, just like I had for so many years. That evening, I passed by James's apartment. The windows were dark. Mail was overflowing from the box. I paused for a moment. I wondered if I should knock. Was there something I needed to say? Some help I should offer? But I kept walking. His pain wasn't mine to carry. It was time for him to learn everyone must take responsibility for their actions. As autumn turned into winter, my life found a new rhythm. Work at the digital marketing firm was going well. I was being promoted to vice president, and I had a team of my own. The time and energy I once saved for my family, I now poured into my career and passions. Aunt Margaret remained by my side. She called every Sunday, and sometimes stayed at my condo. It's beautiful to watch your life bloom, she often said. But the past didn't disappear entirely. One morning in January, a letter arrived in the mail with a familiar handwriting. It was from my father, his 5th letter in 4 months. From the first one, I noticed a shift in tone. It had started as desperate pleading. Eventually, it carried a deeper sense of reflection. I brewed some coffee, sat by the window, and opened the envelope. They were living in a small apartment now. My father had found a part-time job at a local hardware store. My mother started working at a senior care facility, and they were continuing therapy. I rested the letter on my lap and looked outside. With each letter, his words had changed. They no longer begged for forgiveness or help. They spoke of growth and a growing awareness of how I had been treated and how wrong it had all been. Therapy seemed to be helping him. He was starting to understand the depth of what I'd endured. Still, I hadn't replied to any of his letters. That night, Aunt Margaret called me. "Your father phoned me yesterday. He's changing, Emily. Truly." "I believe that," I said. "But it's still too soon for reconciliation." "Of course," she replied. "Everything has its season. Right now, this is your season. You get to decide whether they have a place in your life again." We talked for a while longer, and she promised to come over for dinner next week. After we hung up, I stood by the window again. The city lights glowed softly through the snow. Life is strange. A year ago, I would have done anything to be accepted by my family. I had tied my worth to their approval. But now, I see things differently. My value lives within me. I have learned to love, respect, and protect myself. 2 years have passed since that devastating discovery at Aunt Margaret's house. I'm not the same woman who desperately craved their acceptance. The business has grown beyond my wildest dreams. I now employ 12 people, and we've expanded into 3 new markets. But success hasn't filled the void they left. It's shown me I never needed them to be whole. Some nights I still wonder what would have happened if I had chosen differently. If I had swallowed my pride, accepted their scraps, and continued being their invisible safety net. But then I remember James' words, "Take the hint, we don't want you." And I realize he gave me the greatest gift of all. The truth. Margaret calls it my season of becoming. Maybe she's right. Maybe some of us need to lose our first family to find ourselves. The woman I am now, confident, successful, fiercely protective of my own worth, she was born in that moment of absolute rejection. They thought they were discarding me. Instead, they set me free. Maybe the day will come when I reconcile with my father, maybe with the family, but if it happens, it will be on equal terms. I will never let them define my worth again, and I will never be invisible again.